So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. As usual, I am your host, Hannah Munro, and with me today is Ilana Esterrich. Now, Ilana is the CFO of Planned Parenthood in the US, and I wanted to invite her on the show because when we were talking topics, there was so many different things that we're quite excited to talk about. So, welcome, Ilana. So, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Ilana. What was your journey? How did you end up at Planned Parenthood?
Well, I started my career in management consulting. So it was a great opportunity to work with a variety of different companies and see a lot of the internal workings of a lot of organizations. So my first third of my career was in management consulting, working in groups that specialized in Office of the CFO, or at the time it was called Financial Management and Business Analysis, would have been the early days of the FP&A field. So I spent some time there learning everything you needed to know about walking a line. I worked in manufacturing clients. I worked with government clients. I worked with service clients. Then I moved into the middle aspect of my career. It's kind of the middle third of my career, working for a few large multinational organizations such as General Mills and Thomson Reuters. So in that third of the career, I'm going through the corporate ranks of finance organizations and moving up from analyst to manager. And in this most recent third of my career, I've been in the large association and not-for-profit space. So again, multiple industries, multiple size organizations, multiple areas of an organization. I've been at Planned Parenthood now for approximately 6 months, and I joined at a time when Planned Parenthood is facing unprecedented challenges in an era of uncertainty with respect to sexual reproductive health, democracy, our culture, and the ability of Planned Parenthood affiliates to deliver care to patients and drive local community engagement and advocacy. For those listeners who might not be familiar with what Planned Parenthood is, our mission is to help people live full, healthy lives, no matter what your income is, or level of insurance, or your gender identity, sexual orientation, race, or immigration status. So we provide high quality, inclusive, and comprehensive sexual and reproductive healthcare services to all people that all people need and deserve, and provide it with respect and compassion. And we advocate for public policies that protect and expand reproductive rights and access to a full range of sexual and reproductive healthcare services. And we provide medically accurate education that advances the understanding of human sexuality, healthy relationships, and bodily autonomy. So I've been here, like I said, about 6 months. And in this time, especially going into the 2024 elections here in the United States, our mission is even more critical given the continued attacks on a woman's autonomy to make decisions for and control her own body, the challenges that are being made to sexual reproductive health access, and the infringements on the rights of members of the LGBTQ plus community. In my role specifically as CFO, this means developing an Office of the Chief Financial Officer that will support PPFA's near and long-term goals with data-driven financial reporting and analysis. And to do that, we have a long slate of projects that include automating and accelerating financial operations, specifically around procure-to-pay and accounting operations, and also modernizing and strengthening the FP&A capabilities to ensure that the finance team is a respected and valued strategic business partner across the entire organization, its affiliates, and with a variety of boards and committees that are involved in Planned Parenthood. So over the next 12 to 24 months, I'll be focused on evaluating the financial functional strategy, planning and executing on our finance transformational initiatives, engaging with our board, building a future-focused finance technology roadmap, improving staff engagement, and basically leading transformational change to ensure higher efficiency in our budgeting, reforecasting, and scenario planning analysis capabilities. So the fun stuff that we love to do. So it's a big challenge. It's a steep hill. I have an amazing team here at Planned Parenthood, amazing colleagues, a fantastic mission, and it's going to be a very exciting time.
So just a small to-do list for the next few months then.
Just a small one, just a small to-do list.
Just easy with you. And can I say, I'd love to, I always, it's a really challenging piece, but I think even the news about what's happening, I think in American politics and particularly around reproductive health and all of that has even hit our headlines. So I can completely understand it must be an incredible challenge at the moment to try and support all the great work that you guys do over in the US and I'm pushing that forward at this point in time, especially with the elections coming up. So can I just say I hope I hope and wish you all the very best for that piece. And whilst I'd love to do an entire topic on the politics around Planned Parenthood, I think for our listeners' sake, and we're going to keep it focused on the CFO piece. But I just wanted to say I think it's great work that you guys do. I think, I'm hoping the 2024 elections are going to be a good one for maybe some changes in how things work. So that being said, so let's talk about your lovely big to-do list for the next 6 months. So how do you decide where to start? You're 6 months in. Did you come in with this agenda, or is this the agenda that you've come up with having spent time with the team for the last 6 months?
Well, I was brought in specifically to focus on these things. I am fortunate enough to be taking over the CFO role from an amazing person who is still within PPFA, and she's now taken on the Chief Operating Officer role. So as I was interviewing and being selected for this position, she was very open and honest with me about the work she had done to date and her interest in moving the agenda forward. But as she moves on to take responsibility for a more operational role, really needed someone to pick up the mantle and keep on moving forward. So I was aware of a lot of the things that were in play at the time. And so I didn't necessarily have to start on the ground floor in terms of identifying opportunities. I knew that that was going to be my primary mandate. I'm very fortunate here at Planned Parenthood that the team is a strong, very skilled one, and that they are moving the day-to-day aspects of the finance operation forward, even if it is manual or if some of the tools may be a little bit outdated. So they're being asked now, or I'm asking them now, to work with me collaboratively to not only complete their day jobs, but also have skin in the game, so to speak, and be a part of the future of how we do finance work at the organization. So when I hear people go, I wish we could do something different. I don't like the way we do X, and I really wonder why we can't do ABC. This is an opportunity for them to participate and own the improvements that they're advocating and work in an area that I think a lot of change doesn't really focus on, which is training, change management, communications. I think some of the areas that we run into problems is we create change, we add technology, we innovate, but we don't share that outside of our organizations, outside of finance and the broader organization. We run into a lot of resistance. Why did we do that? It was working just fine for me. This seems more complicated. Why didn't you interview me? I would have told you that this wouldn't work for my department. So one of the things that I bring to the table is the ability to go and knock doors and get our stakeholders to the table and involve them in the change that's going to impact them. And in addition to asking the finance team at Planned Parenthood to do their day jobs and innovate, it's also broadening their individual, what I would call soft skills, which is, being able to say finance concepts in plain English, explaining the why, not just the what and the how, but the why. What's in it for you? How's the work that we're doing in finance going to make your life easier, better, faster, more effective, more efficient? And so those are skills that I think, in general, as a finance profession, we might be a little weaker in. So that's in a nutshell what I've walked into. And it's very clear that we needed to do some financial automation, some financial transformation. There's still a lot of manual processes, which I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to, things that are being done manually, because that's the way they've always been done. These things can be inefficient, they can be demotivating. And of course, the more manual things are, the more prone to errors. And of course, errors cause rework, and rework causes inspection. And those are two things that from the consulting world, we consider non-value added activities, right? And our goal is to eliminate as many non-value added activities as we can. We're still we're still using spreadsheets. And again, that's something that many of your listeners are probably going, yep, we use a lot of spreadsheets. Those are static, they need regular updating. And there's always going to be someone who breaks a cell, breaks a formula, causes an error, and those things have ripple effects downstream, which are very frustrating. We have slow reporting to deal with, being able to, not being able to close on time because someone didn't update something or some piece of data didn't come in on time. And of course, the longer it takes you to provide reporting back into the organization, the longer it takes for them to identify issues, address issues, innovate. So slow reporting is a big deal. We have some fantastic systems which just need a little bit of updating. So dealing with outdated systems, making sure we have the most recent version, or we didn't realize how much the application or the software has advanced and we haven't taken advantage of some of those organic new capabilities. And then we realize that the nature of business is changing. The kinds of information our business partners across the organization need has changed. And so the reporting that we provide is insufficient or not relevant to the changing needs of the organizations. So this creates that burning platform of needing to do pretty significant financial transformation, not just at Planned Parenthood, but in a variety of different organizations across a variety of different industries at all sizes of organization.
And you know what, obviously doing what I do, it's really refreshing to hear somebody that just knows where they're at, right? So you've obviously come in and clocked all of the issues. And I think any of our listeners, if you've not been through a recent transformation project, they're going to be resonating with the spreadsheets, with the slow reporting, with all of that fun stuff. But I actually want to come back to one of the first things you said, and I love this, right? So there is a tendency for finance to start transformation with technology. And I work in technology. I could do this for a living, but even I know that that's not the place that you start. So you've obviously done a lot of management consulting. How do you approach change when you're working either with your finance team, who perhaps are not quite understanding or worried about the impact that it's going to have on their role, but also with the wider organization? What's your approach to supporting that change and generating the excitement, I guess, for change?
So there's a fine line of change for change's sake, and there's an interesting part of discomfort, right? There's an aspect of discomfort with change that needs to be overcome. And what I like to do is really interrogate the whys, like why are we doing things? So pulling from my consulting days, there's a theory of change management about the 5 whys. If you ask the why question 5 times, eventually you're going to get to the root cause of things. So one of the things that I do in my role as CFO coming into a new organization, kind of in that 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan, is I meet everybody. I go to every department. I interview, within the finance, I go all the way from the VP all the way down. I meet everybody down to the specialist level. I look at the org chart and I say, well, who are my peers in the C-suite? Who are their direct reports? And then go down and I meet everybody. I spent a lot of time in the first 30 days just meeting and greeting, doing one-on-ones. And at the end of every one-on-one is, who do you recommend I meet next? Who do you think will give me more information either about this area, about that problem, about a certain concern, and just continue to interrogate down. And I've been here 6 months and I still have not completed meeting everybody that I feel I need to meet in order to make some of these big decisions. I want to build excitement. I know that the finance team can be technically oriented and there's this big desire to let's just do it. Let's just fix the problem. Let's just implement the system. But we need to make sure that whatever solution we put in place is useful in the long term. And we don't want to get 12 months, 18 months down the road and go, why did we do that? That seems so silly now in retrospect, or an issue popped up that we should have known and we didn't know. So I bring the stakeholders into our project team meetings. In some of my meetings, I have more non-finance people at my meetings than I do finance people. I have legal, I have ITIS, I have the business people. If we're dealing with revenue, I bring the development folks in. I'm constantly proselytizing with my colleagues on the executive leadership team about all the wonderful things we're doing. And every once in a while, someone will say, have you talked to so-and-so? Have you looked at the way we do X, Y, and Z? Or did you know that we have a team that does what you're talking about already? Oh, that's a surprise. Well, let me go find out what they're doing. And many times these organizations have been creating what we will call shadow finance, because finance itself was not able to do something. And so they've created their own capabilities. And so why would I reinvent the wheel? Let me go see what wheel they've invented and whether or not we can put that into our high performance vehicle, so to speak. So I spend a lot of time fact finding. I spend a lot of time sharing information, just asking a lot of questions. I can be kind of a pest with my questions. I'm still relatively new, 6 months. I've been told that at Planned Parenthood, it will take me about a year. I'll have to lap the whole 12 months before I will feel completely seated. And it's because we are constantly faced with different changes and different, for lack of a better term, external attacks that require us to adapt and be very nimble and resilient. But I look at it as, as being a high performance vehicle. We are not the drivers of the high performance vehicle, but we are the road crew. We are the mechanics. We are the data keepers. We're looking outside of the back window, looking at the backwards facing things such as, the financial statements and our tax statements and other statutory reporting. But that's the traditional view of finance. How did we do in the past as of a certain date, as of, a month ending a certain time? So we're in the back seat. We're giving advice and recommendations to the drivers. So we're kind of the prototypical backseat driver, if you will, and not everyone enjoys that. So I need to find a way to get finance invited to the table. And so we also need to let them know that we're checking the tires and the gas tank. Do we have enough cash, enough fuel in the tank to get us where the organization wants to go? Are we even in the right vehicle to begin with, right? You wouldn't take a race car to do grocery shopping at the supermarket, and you certainly wouldn't take it off-roading, but you wouldn't necessarily put an electric vehicle in a Formula One race. So are we in the right vehicle? Are we using the right infrastructure tools? Do we have the right human resources to support our strategy and objectives? And then are we going in the right direction? So the board and our stakeholders, whether we're in a not-for-profit or for-profit, they are our GPS. So we are constantly looking at the GPS to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And I don't know, sometimes I've been in a rental car, let's say, and that GPS hasn't been updated and it's telling us to take a left turn. And like, how am I going to take a left turn? I'm on a bridge, right? So we're trying to make sure that that GPS is accurate and that we're going in the right direction, that we're navigating, and that we're giving our driver, essentially our leadership team and our CEO, the right information to make the right decisions. And then we're constantly looking at the windshields, the windows, the sunroof, to make sure that we are anticipating, the future. So the only way to really understand that for your organization is getting outside of your desk, outside of your office, and walking the floor, asking the right questions, meeting the right people. And I think I might have zigged when you wanted to zag on that. That was a long explanation, which I think gets to your question, but we can always revisit.
And you actually talked about, again, something really interesting. I just want to dig into a little bit. So tell us more about shadow finance, because I think this is an interesting concept, and I've seen it a lot in other organizations. So other teams trying to step up and fill the gap between what finance should, or that what they want finance to deliver versus what finance is delivering. So what's your perspective on shadow finance?
Well, I've been in organizations where if it has a dollar sign, it must be a finance metric. So finance should report on it and do it, right? But in those organizations, I've had to say, time out. Just because it has a dollar sign does not mean that it is a finance item, right? Your calculator works just as well as our calculators. And I've been in other organizations where, we know our business, we know our department, we know the work we're supposed to do. So we're going to just give you our numbers. And that also doesn't work, right? We're not receivers of information. For finance organizations where we're much more than just journal entry, debits and credits. We booked an entry. We're doing financial statements. We're doing tax. For organizations that want to do more than that, we have to find what that nice overlap is. And shadow finance organizations usually happen where there is some kind of data, both operational blended with financial information, that is not coming timely enough or thorough enough from the finance organization. That can be because finance doesn't have the tools. It can be because finance isn't aware of the business need for that kind of analysis, or we simply just weren't invited to the table. And so you'll see that in organizations where they have created or bought or made their own data warehouses, right? They might have purchased Salesforce or some kind of customer relationship management software and jury rigged it to be able to track the kinds of information they need to make business decisions for their group, their area, or their department. And it often involves financial information. And what happens in many organizations is these shadow finance numbers, they grow wings and they fly around the organization. And someone will say, well, that department told me that it's $100 per unit. And finance is looking at itself going, what? Where did that come from? Because we're showing that it's $60 per unit. And so, again, it's because finance and the business are not necessarily talking to each other. They are not sitting at each other's tables. They are not discussing the what, the how, and the why. And so we have now a conflict. And depending on the kind of information, if that shadow finance is giving a better number than what finance is saying, well, guess who management is going to believe? Management is going to believe the better number. So I'm not necessarily saying that shadow finance is 100% bad, but I do think it's a misuse of resources. And that if finance and these shadow groups were to be able to communicate and get onto a consistent understanding and really understand what the true menu of items are, we could either find a way to incorporate that into our normal operating finance processes and automate that, and thereby allow these shadow finance folks to do more of the operational analysis, the work that their departments originally intended them to do. Or it's one area, if it's more robust in those departments, it's an area that finance can link into. So this is why you see some organizations, they may have a lot of information coming in from their CRM systems that could have been tracked in their finance systems. So it really depends on the organization. But the term shadow finance in and of itself means that there is a dysfunction or an inefficiency in the finance that needs to be addressed.
And absolutely, and weirdly enough, I actually come from a Salesforce admin background, so I have seen so many finance departments and finance reporting elements created out of CRMs, and it's actually my one watch list when I see, because you spend so much time trying to reconcile the numbers. And actually, my answer to that is always about how do we feed that information back into CRM? How do we share the invoicing? How do we share all of that great information back into CRM so that they can access it, but we're talking from a single source of truth? So yeah, and I think that's an understated risk. I think of shadow finance is almost where is the information coming from, but what is the right system to be the source of record? And it doesn't mean that you can't access that information, but you've got to get to what is the true source of truth, because otherwise you spend so much time reconciling. And like you said at the beginning, and I think it's lovely to talk to somebody from a consulting background, is that when you that all of that time, all of that energy is spent in reconciliation and checking and moving data. And that's just wasted effort for finance. And so we need to, and finance become the bad guys when they're saying, oh, that's wrong. You know, your sales CRM team, your data isn't right, mine is right, because it ultimately is. And so that again
Correct.
is all, it's all about creating those relationships.
Right. And so if the organization says, we are married to Salesforce, and you look at the invoice and you're like, well, what you have there is two debits. You don't have necessarily a correct debit and a credit, or you're using the wrong accounts. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just make sure, if you really are married to your Salesforce as a or whatever your CRM system is, as a source of truth for customer information, for revenue information, well, then let's get it right in Salesforce, and then make sure it flows correctly into the book of record, which is your financial system, because that is where your financial reports are coming from. And that's feeding into your budgeting and forecasting and scenario planning systems. So then let's make sure that the marriage between your CRM and your finance is correct. So let's partner up and make sure we're doing it the right way. So let's move from a very combative, this is my data, that's your thing, stay on your side of the river and I'll stay on my side of the river, or in your swim lane and my swim lane. In the end of the day, we're in the same swimming pool and we have the same goal, right? We all want to win the gold medal and we all want to get the rate to the end of the race. So we're going to have to be collaborative. And I think that leads into some of the skills that finance is not known for, which is the ability to have emotional skills, soft skills, communication skills, even just speaking plain English. When we start to get very technical with that's a debit and a credit, and that's on my balance sheet, and people don't know the difference between balance sheet and income statement. And what do you mean it's a balance sheet transaction versus it's an expense? No, it's not. It's a liability. So we need to be able to speak plain English, and that's not something that my experience has shown us to be part of the education, the organic, basic education of a finance and accounting professional. I mean, we still talk about finance and accounting as two different things. And generally, you're right, accounting and finance do two different things, but they have to be holistic and they have to work together. And I think we get mired, the accountants get mired in GAAP and international accounting standards, and this is the way it's supposed to be done. I'm like, yes, that's true. That is the legal fiduciary way to do things. But the role of the finance side of that component is to translate that into a way that the organization can use. And that's learning how to speak in metaphors, being able to draw a good picture. And I know some people hate PowerPoint, but I find that if you can synthesize a financial concept into a picture using Google Sheets or Google whatever, or PowerPoint or whatever visual tool you want to use, you're able to get those people that don't think in numbers to go, I got it, I understand now. And that makes the communication and the collaboration a lot easier.
So, and I can agree with more. I had a great podcast on the art of data storytelling. And for our listeners, if you haven't listened to that one, definitely go back and have a look at that one. I think it was with Brent. But I think the hardest thing is knowing, how do we teach those skills? How do you educate and teach your finance team how to speak in plain English? Is it something where you recruit in those skills? Do you train your existing teams? What's your approach?
So I'm a big fan of learning something new every day. I do an immense amount of reading. I attend a lot of different webinars. I subscribe to a lot of different articles, whether in print journal, or online. And I like to share that with my team. So in every organization that I've been, I create kind of an OCFO professional development folder. So as I read something really interesting, whether it relates to a gap issue, an FP&A topic, or even just general good leadership, something that really goes, oh, that's an amazing thing, I need to share that. If I can get it in PDF, I drop it into that OCFO professional development folder, and everybody in my organization has access to that. I'm a big believer in professional development training. So every year I take my team And this year I'll be taking the Planned Parenthood finance team to the Association for Financial Professionals annual conference. This year it's going to be in San Diego. So my Treasury folks can go learn more about Treasury, but they can also go learn about FP&A. And the FP&A folks can get some deep dive into the latest in FP&A, but also might learn some things about leadership. And I take varying levels of the organization. So I'm taking my accountants, my Treasury folks, my FP&A team, my direct leadership, because everybody's going to come out with something new. And then if I send someone out to a different training, for example, if I send someone to a deep dive Sage and TAC, what I ask them is come back and give me 3 things that you've learned and share that with your colleagues. I'm a firm believer that if you don't train folks, I think, I can't remember who said it, but maybe it was Sir Richard Branson, but he's like, train people well enough so train people well enough so they can't leave, but treat them well enough so they don't want to. And then that's followed up by a quote from Henry Ford, who said, the only thing worse than training your employees and having them leave is not training them and having them stay. So I acknowledge that the more I train someone, there's a high likelihood that they become more value added to another organization, and they might say, "I'm going to take all my new skills and I'm going to go somewhere else." And if that happens, as long as they're going to a better situation, more pay, a promotion, I am so excited that I was part of their journey of growth. I would be very disappointed if they said, I'm leaving because you suck, or this organization isn't what I want to do. That for me would be a failure as a leader, right? So I want to train people so that they stay and so that they understand that their growth is going to be imperative to the growth of the organization. So I share everything I learned. I'm not selfish about that whatsoever. And I also encourage them to come back to me and say, I read an article about a new concept and I think it would work really well. Great, let's talk about it. Explain to me how you think it will work well. What do you think you're going to need to be able to roll this out? And how do we go forward and do it? So the flip side of that is, if you come to me with a great idea, you're going to be responsible for implementing it. And I think that's actually worked out really well. People really want to have a sense of ownership of the work that they do. They are proud when their ideas become implemented. And as a selfless leader, I make sure that those folks get public recognition. This is not an idea that came from me as CFO. This is an idea that came from this specific person. They took ownership of it, and this is how the organization is benefiting from it. So making sure that they get the credit for the work that they're doing is another part of making sure that we continue to adapt and change and evolve.
And I think that's so important, isn't it? Is recognition is a key part of any successful change story. And I think I love that approach. And I like to think that everyone does that automatically, but what I've learned over the years is that's not always the case. So it's great to hear that discussed.
Some people are just not used to it. It's kind of beaten dog syndrome. And I've seen that in organizations throughout my career where, what's the point? They're not going to listen to me. Why should I even try to innovate? It's not going to go anywhere. Or the last time I tried to do something, the idea, someone took the idea and ran with it, and it wasn't what my original idea was. So the other part of a learning organization that I try to inculcate is that I invite people to actively disagree with me. And it's a concept that I learned in the military about, it's a concept coming from the after action review about, what did we do? What was supposed to happen? What did we do? What actually happened? What worked well? What could work better? What would we do differently next time? So and there are times when you might have a great idea, but in the scope of things, it's just not a right fit. And sometimes as a leader, I need to make a bottom line decision, right? A lot of great ideas, but we can't implement all of them. So as a leader, I make the decision and I say, well, I've made a leadership decision. We're going to go down a certain path. But I always invite people to disagree with me, right? So what am I missing here? And what could possibly go wrong if we embrace this new idea or we're down a very specific path? What are the alternatives we're facing? And is this the right team? Do we have the right skill sets? Or are we even focusing on the right problem? So that would be the follow-up to, how we teach people to embrace change, how we teach people to do better in their roles. and to make sure that they keep me honest as well, because I have had to walk back ideas and say, we were going to go down this particular path, but after hearing the objections and seeing now the impact, I'm willing to change courses, and this is what we're going to do instead.
Yeah, and there's an amazing book. I think she's ex-Google, by Radical Candor. I'm not sure if you read it, but I love that, and that's along
Yes.
those same
Yes.
principles, like encouraging, challenging fairly, not obnoxiously, and encouraging your team to do the same, which I love. Sometimes it's hard to create that environment, but when it works, it's just amazing, and people feel free to disagree. And I think in finance, people have to be. If you think about the responsibility of finance and the ethics of finance, I actually think of all the departments, having that candor and that ability to go, I don't think something's right here. It's just so important.
Well, and we have no trust if we're not doing things ethically. And unfortunately, there have been some examples of unethical behavior, unethical leadership that have impacted the finance industry or the finance profession. But if we do things with a mind to doing the right things for the right reasons, with the right people, at the right time, with the right tools, we can't go wrong.
Absolutely, and that's a long list of rights, but I think, as you say, if we get all of those things lined up, we're in an amazing position. I'm rapidly realizing we've just been chatting for almost 35 minutes and not even taken a pause or a breath, and I feel like we could probably keep going for another 30 or so without taking another breath. But I'm going to dig a bit more into some of the things that we talked about. So we've talked about obviously the concept of shadow finance, right? But we also started with talking about change. And given your years of experience in management consulting, where do you think the biggest challenges are in CFOs in terms of transformation? What do you think are the key lessons and things they need to think about before they approach their next finance transformation project?
I think it's making sure you know what the problem you're solving for really is. There is so much chatter out there right now about FP&A 4.0, RPA, AI, advanced automation capabilities. And I think that's kind of stressful to the broader CFO community. So think about this. It's probably one of the most diverse professions. It can be industry agnostic. The skills, the basic skills of a finance and accounting profession can be somewhat agnostic. But we come in all shapes and sizes, right? We've got small companies, we've got, multi-billion-dollar multinationals. If you're in the commercial real estate space, your concerns are very different than if you're in manufacturing, or if you're in the not-for-profit space versus, I don't know, the defense industry. So it's a very 3D career field, right? In terms of size, in terms of industry, and then in terms of the functionality, right? We have some CFOs that are playing not just closing the books, but they also have an HR component, an IT component, a facilities component. And then you have other CFOs who literally are just dealing with boards, stakeholders, investors, more outward looking CFOs. So it's a very 3-dimensional career field. And I think we often get wrapped around the axle with, we just have to automate. We just have to put in an AI system or do RPA. And I think we really need to slow down and acknowledge what are we solving for, right? Having the right debate, asking the right questions. And then because of the nature of technology now, we have so much data. I'm old enough to remember when we were making flip charts or the transparency overheads with our presentations, right? And just flipping the overheads, and those things weighed a ton. And you'd have to go from client to client with, do you have the deck? And the deck was just boxes of transparencies. And then all of a sudden the projectors and I started in Lotus 123, which then became Excel, which now we've got Google Sheets. So I've seen the progression and how much data. I remember way back 30 years ago going to a consulting client, and they were so excited because they got their first computers, and their first computers were the black screens with the green text. And they were receiving a lot of resistance from their accounting department, who were quite happy with their 13 column paper ledgers. It's been good enough for 100 years. I don't understand why we need this new computer. That's crazy to me. So I've seen the gamut. Today, we have so much data, so many metrics, so many numbers floating around. It becomes analysis paralysis. It's a real thing. And here's where I'm going to quote Albert Einstein, who said, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." And so I really think the skill is to figure out, again, not just the problem that we're trying to solve for and asking the right questions, but what is the right data that we need to be able to make the right decisions. So that goes back to my 5 rights. Is it the right thing with the right time, with the right people, with the right solution? Are we having the right data? And if we don't have the right data, where do we go to get it? And how do we track it? How do we vet it to make sure that it's giving us the right thing? And then the other part is the relationships. Are we building the relationships within the organization that is going to facilitate all of the work that we need to do to be as value added to the entire organization, not just to the C-suite, but to the VP level and to the manager, director level, manager level, the functional folks that are actually doing the day-to-day work. Do we have the right data to support them? And then the final thing is, do we have the right talent? So these are things that we weren't trained for when we went to undergraduate in business, or when we got our MBAs. Unless you were an HR major or had an HR concentration, we weren't learning necessarily about what does it mean to have the right talent. How do you develop talent? How do you work with people? I remember taking leadership classes, but not necessarily leadership to grow an organization or empower an organization, but rather more directive leadership. Do this, go over there and do that. And that is not sufficient for the world that we live in currently.
No, and I think that, to be very fair, that's what prompted my first. It's why I started the podcast, is because I had the opportunity to learn all about sustainable transformational leadership, and I think for me it really helped me understand why some of the projects I'd worked on have been so successful, and why some of them had challenges. And actually, I think it's a huge piece. Is like we can literally put the best piece of technology in front of it. The processes can be nailed, the technology can be fabulous, but if the people aren't ready and willing to change, and they don't have the right skills to support the change, it's such a challenge, and we always get there, but we can tell that. I can normally tell the difference when I walk into an org. I know, is this going to be an easy? I say, and there's always caveat. I don't think any change is easy, but is this going to be on the easier side of the scale? Yeah.
Easy will always be in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Right? Because everyone's level of easy is a little different. But one of the things is, especially with this transformation that we're doing now at Planned Parenthood, is something as simple as a finance 101, right? What is a balance sheet? What is an income statement? Or in the not-for-profit world, statement of financial position or statement of activities. It might, some of my team members are going to roll their eyes and go, that's so basic. Yes, it is basic, but you would not believe how many people in the organization do not understand what that is. And once you get the light bulb going, I understand the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement, then when you start talking about things like simplifying the chart of accounts, then it makes sense. Because then it's going to be easier to track this. When you start telling them about how we're going to do zero-based budgeting, they're not scratching their heads. What do you mean a blank sheet of paper and starting from scratch? I don't understand that. When you start to incorporate things, you need to make sure the entire organization has that foundational. And so part of our change management will be finance 101s. There are people who are picture oriented and not numbers oriented. So can we synthesize the concepts into a picture, into a PowerPoint slide that doesn't have any words, that literally can show people data coming here, we'll do this, and then it'll come out over here, and here's what you're going to be able to do with it, to get some of those light bulbs going off. Some folks are self-learners. And so can we use an intranet site to post as much about what's happening in the OCFO, what's part of the transformation, where are we, here's the project plan, to allow people to self-discover. You have some people who are introverts who don't necessarily want to be giving classes, giving instruction, and others that are just absolute extroverts that you tell them, can you go and meet with this team and do the training? They will run that training, and they will be superstars. So that change management, that training, that becoming almost obnoxious with how much you're sharing, and even creating that sense of, wow, they're doing some amazing things in the finance team. They're always so excited to share, even to the point of oversharing, builds a sense of excitement, builds a sense of expectation, so that when things get rolled out, they're already ready to receive because they've been along for the ride, right? And when they're along for the ride and things finally go live, right, that term of go live date, they're going to be a lot easier to train, a lot easier to enforce, a lot easier to adhere to the processes, and more willing to let go of their favorite pet rock or their sacred cow. That, this is what I've always done. They're going to be more likely to let go because they know what's in it for them. So that's where I've talked multiple times about the what and the how, but the why. When you're able to adequately and sufficiently explain the why, the what's in it for me, it makes organizational change so much easier. And it becomes one team versus, that finance and accounting team, they're such pests. They're sitting there rocking the boat and they're getting all this attention. No, it's not us. It's us in the big. That's going to be critical as well.
And that's exciting. So the next time our listeners are trying to convince somebody in another department to let go of that spreadsheet that they are desperately clinging on to for dear life, listen back to this podcast and follow Ilana's suggestions. And thank you so much, Ilana, for coming and sharing your knowledge and your experience and your excitement for the changes that are ahead at Planned Parenthood. So if some of our listeners perhaps want to learn more about yourself or the organisation and what you guys are doing, where's the best place to find you? Where can they learn more?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I update my LinkedIn quite frequently and post quite a bit about the things that I enjoy learning about. They can reach out to me through Planned Parenthood. They can go to the website if they're interested in finding out more about Planned Parenthood. And I speak at a variety of different organizations. I'm a member of a lot of the big ones. So if you don't get a hold of me online, most likely you'll run into me in person.
Well, thank you so much. And for anyone listening that would like more, I'll pop those links in the show notes. And I thank you once again, Ilana, for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us today.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
So if you've enjoyed this podcast, well, firstly, thank you for listening, but don't forget to reach out to me. As always, just like we've been talking on this podcast, I love feedback. Constructive criticism is always welcome. So be candid, as we talked about earlier, and be honest. If there's any questions I missed, perhaps you want Ilana back on for maybe another podcast, if we can sneak her in, then please do reach out to me. Let me know what you liked. Let me know what we can do better. Don't forget to subscribe at www.itasolutions.co.uk, where you can click on the resources, click on podcast, and get the alerts straight to your inbox.